WestCoastGatherings.com presents Vancouver Nightlife, hosted by Malcolm Winters, an inquisitive look into Vancouver's nightlife over the last 3 decades.
And that'll bring Danny Evans to the plate. The shortstop, coming off a 4-hit game last night, checks in against the tall left-hander and takes a strike at the knees, zone 1. Evans hitting .274. He has 11 home runs, 47 runs batted in. Not much of a win today. Outfield playing straight away. Pitch to Evans is popped up behind second base. Hubbard goes out to the edge of the grass and one-hands it for the second out of the inning.
Hello and welcome. I'm Malcolm Winters and this is Vancouver Nightlife. In this sub-series of episodes, we break bread with ex-promoters, piece together some of the history, who they are today, and finally, where they feel Raves will go post-COVID-19. In this week's first episode of sub-series, Raves Then and Now, we break bread with ex-promoter Stephen Hakl, known only back in the day as Old School Steve. Hello, Steve, and welcome to the show. Why don't we start by giving the listeners a little background on your involvement in the Vancouver rave scene. When did you become a promoter, and how long were you raving before you started your career in the industry?
Thanks, Malcolm. Great to be here and cool to be heard. I don't think you could call it an industry at that point, at least definitely not to what industry standards are today, pre-COVID, of course. My first experience with the rave culture would have been downtown Vancouver, all ages, after hours, was called a Poco Loco. We were at a bar and we were stranded and it was the only thing open at the time. One of those highlight moments of your life, I was actually picked up and asked to come back to this outdoor apartments after event. Little did I know that would be the second generation of the rave culture here in Vancouver. My very first rave would have been at the skate ranch that was owned by Kevin Harris, our very own Tony Hawk, if you're into skateboarding at all. Another very memorable night, though same people I went to that event with are the people that stayed with me, not only through the 6-7 years I was promoting through the scene, but good friends with today. Steve, can you set the scene for us and tell us what it was like to become a promoter in the early 90s? Well, Malcolm, like I said, it definitely wasn't a scene at that point. There wasn't really a rave culture in Vancouver. Definitely a bar scene, definitely a couple nights dedicated to DJs, but still very much a rock type of bar scene here in Vancouver. So much the fact that the bar owners used to call the police on the raves. Understandably, that they would lose their clientele at around 10 o'clock. Their clientele would leave the bar to try and get to the rave early. It wasn't until the point where our crew suggested to use Gracelands as the checkpoint for one of our events, which worked very well and was the birth of promoters and bars working together hand in hand. Now remember, this was a time where promoters called the police on other promoters. Vancouver went so far as to start using their SWAT team against and for shutting down raves. Mind you, a lot of the events were not, you didn't have running water, you didn't have bathroom facilities, didn't have bottled water, didn't have paramedics or security. So it was something that definitely evolved, something that we set the standards for and was followed through. One of the greatest things about Vancouver and the Vancouver scene was that there was never ever any fights inside one of the events. It was always saved for like the next day or outside of the scene. I only know one actual situation where someone got jacked and it was more of a comical situation and it was straightened out shortly afterwards. Share with us, Steve, after putting in so much time in the youth and rave scene for the Vancouver and Lower Mainland, what made you decide to leave, and where do you see yourself today?
Really, at some point in your life, you have to decide what's really important and what's not. Like many young men at my age, I found a significant other and we had a child. The mature, responsible thing was to raise my son. So I stepped back out of the social eye of the rave scene for about 2 years before I actually moved to Calgary, and that's where I raised my son, pretty much on my own. The Vancouver rave scene in and itself had changed so drastically much by that point, and drugs hit pretty hard in 2000, and by the time I left in 2002, it just wasn't the same as what it was when we began. Moving back to Calgary, I felt as a single parent I needed to offer my son as much family as possible, and of course that's where my parents and brothers still live, so I felt it was the right thing to do, and obviously it served us really well moving back. Having my parents as part of my son's life has been a fantastic blessing both on my son and myself. I've really grown close to my parents. Part of moving to BC was getting away from family, and we've mended all of that. Career-wise, of course, it was important to find something not only with a proper salary, but gave me the time as a single parent to raise my son properly. Becoming a certified RV technician really hit all those points really well for me. Of course, physical labor and working in a garage takes a toll on anyone's body, mine not being that big as it was. I soon decided to take up a career at my dream job, which would be a tattoo artist. I studied for about 5 years before opening my own tattoo studio in High River, Alberta. Hit a serious hiccup there and had to close down my shop, and at that point it was definitely time to head back to BC. The idea was to start vlogging as much as possible, create a larger social atmosphere around my social media so that I was comfortable enough that once I wanted to travel through Southeast Asia documenting tattooing, that I would be able to not only fund myself but have people interested in doing what I was doing. So became the birth of Back to the West Coast. Back to the West Coast, of course, as I said, is a vlog on YouTube. It has a Facebook page. Basically just me moving back to Vancouver. Ended up being on Vancouver Island for the last 3 years, living on and rebuilding a 1970 Chris Craft Ventura speedboat, and all my misadventures there on the island.
Prior to COVID-19, you re-established westcoastgatherings.com. What hardships did you find, and where do you see raves post-COVID-19? westcoastgatherings.com was originally established to help promote the 90s rave scene anniversary party. Of course, it wasn't able to get off the ground due to a death in the family. Moving forward a couple years, just 6 months prior to COVID, re-established West Coast Gatherings so that we could create and promote Never Never Land 2, the 25th anniversary. And of course, with COVID hitting, especially the lockdowns in July and August, the 25th year anniversary was canceled. I really don't feel anyone can make a decision on when or how the industry will get back up on its feet. I feel it might be a number of years before it can be reestablished again and be what it was prior to COVID-19. Thank you for joining us. It's been a real treat having promoter Steve Hakl joining us from westcoastgatherings.com. Join us next week with special guest Scott Scooter Shrills, the creator and administrator of the 90s West Coast rave community. I'm Malcolm Winters, and you've been listening to Vancouver Nightlife.